Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessica Wagner, Associate Director of Prevention Health Promotion at the NCAA Sports Science Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome everyone this morning to our session on coping with the silent pandemic. In this joint session between the Office of Inclusion and the Sports Science Institute, we will guide participants through coping with a silent pandemic facing student athletes, mental health well-being challenges. This year, student athletes have had to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic while experiencing a year full of social justice and racial tensions in our society. Leading our discussion today is Dr. Stephanie Coakley, and I'm so excited to have her here leading the thoughts and opinions and elevating the voice of our student athletes. Dr. Coakley is a Senior Associate Athletic Director for Mental Health, Wellness, and Performance at Temple University Department of Athletics. She is also the co-chair of the recent NCAA Summit on Diverse Student Athletes and Mental Health Well-Being. So it is my pleasure to now turn it over to Dr. Coakley to lead us in our session.
Good morning, and thank you, Jessica, for that introduction. Before we get started, I just want to say a big thank you in advance to our panel and to our audience. Thank you for coming in this morning to spend some time with us. We are so grateful to our panelists for agreeing to join us to have this conversation about coping with the silent pandemic. This conversation and conversations like this are saving lives. We cannot change what we do not face, and it's time for us to change. We all have to be willing to have these conversations because everything that we've gone through the last 14-ish months, we're at a tipping point. Look, when one of the most prominent stars in tennis and the highest paid female athlete actually said the silent part out loud, and she said, "I have depression," and she was met with fines and threats of harsher sanctions and punishments, and she ultimately withdrew in order to protect her mental health, it speaks volumes. And what it's saying, although there was a lot of support for this young woman, there was a lot of anger directed towards her for speaking her truth. What was said spoke volumes, and it wasn't good. Because of these kinds of incidents, many athletes remain silent because of fear of this level of scrutiny and skepticism. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic, which has disproportionately affected communities of color, has created a perfect scenario for greater risk of mental health challenges for the general population, and student athletes are not exempt from this increased risk. Since the beginning of the pandemic, quarantine and isolation, online instruction, canceled classes, canceled seasons, canceled graduations, family and friends getting ill, and in many cases dying, student athletes having COVID, and some are still experiencing the effects. Let's be clear about that. Constant fluctuations in terms of the collegiate athletic schedule, and then big emotions like fear, anxiety, uncertainty, grief, loss. Not to mention the traumatic acts of police brutality, systemic racism, nationwide protests, acts of violence against many communities, Asian American communities, and so many other forms of social injustice just create increased risk for mental health conditions for our student athletes. I can go on, but I won't, because we have this panel of activists and advocates who are ready to give us their thoughts about how to cope with the long-term effects of COVID-19 and the silent pandemic, as we direct our thoughts and our attention to returning to campuses in the fall. With that being said, I am honored, I'm grateful to introduce our panelists this morning. They are staunch advocates for student athlete mental health. Now, they're going to introduce themselves. They will each take a minute or two to introduce themselves. Let's start with Mercy Ogutu, Coach Kerry Nakamoto, and then Dr. Brandon Henry. Mercy?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mercy Gitu, and I'm currently a volleyball and tennis student athlete here at Trinity Washington University in the beautiful District of Columbia. I was born in Kenya and raised in the beautiful city of Atlanta, Georgia. And here at Trinity Washington University, while being a double major in political science and international affairs, being active in the NCAA National Student Athlete Advisory Committee for Division III sports has really inspired me to one day be a policy advisor for health policies to really make a change for like everyone on both the national and also the global level. On the NCAA National Student Athlete Advisory Committee for Division III sports, I currently serve as the chair of the Working Group of Inclusion and Social Justice and also a senior representative on the Minorities, Interests, and Opportunities Committee on the Board of Governors. And with my participation in different programs, I'm able to work with different student athletes to create planning for monthly student-based initiatives that are focused on civic engagement, mental health awareness, community outreach programs, and also be a voice for student athletes across all divisions to make sure that we are heard and also we are supported through the NCAA. During my community here on campus, I'm very active on campus. I serve as the class of 2023 president and also the chair of the Trinity Washington Student Athlete Advisory Committee. And also I volunteer with Special Olympics DC, and I serve as student representative on the university engagement team, Special Olympics college and national work team. And I'm excited for this conversation and discussion on the importance of mental health awareness for student athletes. Thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Coach Kerry Nakamoto from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and I'm excited to be here today, so thanks for having me as a panelist. This was my 18th season coaching. We had a canceled season, so that plays into a lot of our discussion today and my experience with our student athletes. I have my master's in counseling, and a lot of my research and everything was directed at student athletes during that time. I am SAC advisor at UAF, so have been dealing with this year, amongst others, and just dealing with everything that we're facing. I'm part of the DEI Strategic Planning Committee on campus, where we're creating a plan for inclusive excellence at UAF and also tying mental health into that. And I'm excited to be here, and I look forward to the discussion.
I'll say good evening. I'm currently in Montenegro with the USA men's water polo team as we're preparing for the Olympics. And so it's about 5:11 p.m. here. So, but good evening, everybody. My name is Brandon Henry. I am a sports medicine physician in Riverside, California. I am the head team doc for California Baptist University Athletics. I am a former two-sport collegiate athlete in baseball and football. I graduated from the illustrious Howard University College of Medicine. And I am also the assistant director for the Tour for Diversity in Medicine, which is an organization that aims to educate, cultivate, and inspire the next generation of physicians, dentists, podiatrists, pharmacists, whatever it has that you may be, professional of color. So yes, I will let us go ahead and get started because we have an exciting discussion. And so it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you, panelists. We are so excited. I'm ready. So I'm going to start us off with asking a question to Mercy. Mercy, you talked about using a voice, being a voice for student athletes. Why should college student athletes care about their mental health?
So as a college athlete myself, I've seen how when we don't really focus on the mental health that affects the productivity when we play our sports, when we're in practice, but also just our well-being. It's important to have these conversations about what birth feels, and also to have different initiatives of how to incorporate different practices of mental well-being like into our lives. Because when you're in college, you already have to balance school, sports, but when you have like such a variety of different things, sometimes we lose track of taking care of ourselves. And it's important that we make sure that we incorporate mental health as the main focus for student athletes to be productive, like in our sports, in school, but also in life, because mental health affects everybody. It's important that we take care of ourselves.
Thank you, Mercy. You bring up a good point. You're advocating for a top-down approach to student-athlete well-being. I always say everything starts with up here, and the mind controls the body. So, Coach Kerry, do you have anything that you'd like to add? Why should student-athletes care about mental health?
I think it's really important that, especially I'll add coaches into this, or administrators, take into consideration the mental health aspect, because so much focus is put on the physical, kind of like Mercy said, like how good you are in your sport. But when their mental health is struggling, then it's going to affect everything in their life, not only on the playing field, but in the classroom, at home, with their families. So I think being aware of yourself and having the resources is really important for the student athletes, and taking care of that first so they can be their best in every other aspect.
Thank you. I love that. Taking care of that first. Dr. Henry, let's bring you in. Why should student athletes care about their mental health? What are your perspectives on that question?
I think when you think about from the medical side, we're talking about health, right? And in order for an athlete, a collegiate athlete, to be able to perform at their best, they have to be physically healthy as well as mentally healthy. And even speaking from my own personal experience, I dealt with the mental health side of things to where it started affecting me physically. So I think that's the thing that a lot of young athletes have to understand, is that you can see physical effects of your mental health. And, again, if you're not mentally able to compete at your highest level, and then physically, you are now putting yourself in a position to get injured even further because of the effects that mental health can take. And so I think it's just understanding that it is not just a one track kind of thing. Mental health is something that can affect every area of your life, including your health, and again, health is wealth. So we've got to keep ourselves as healthy as possible.
Absolutely. I love that you all made very great points. I love that you touched on, Dr. Henry, the connection between mind and body. I would like to ask you can you give us a few examples, maybe 4 or 5, like what would physical manifestations of mental health look like? Some people may not know.
Sure. No, absolutely correct. It's interesting because when the mental health part of things really starts to take over physically, it can manifest itself in very weird ways. I have had people who have complained to me of having, their heart just racing for absolutely no reason. I've had people have numbness or tingling around their mouth. Only I know me personally, I had numbness and tingling from my elbow down on both arms, and even from my knees down. But you can also have things like weight loss. You can have things such as GI symptoms, right? Upset stomach, diarrhea, constipation. It can show itself in many different ways. And so I think it's one of those things of, if you are, you're going through a stressful time, and you are starting to notice weird changes in your body that are abnormal from your normal patterns, that's when you speak to your athletic trainer, you talk to your coaches, and then, you go to your team doc, and we approach it as a team way to get you better.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. Yes, wonderful. Some of these abnormal changes, they mean something. Things don't just happen. There's a reason for everything that happens to us. And oftentimes we just ignore these things, but to our detriment, I would suggest. So, Coach, 18 seasons. Wow, that's awesome. Can you share with us some best practices for athletic departments in supporting student athletes from diverse identities with respect to their mental health?
I think one unique thing we have in Alaska in particular dealing with mental health is a little bit of a lack of diversity within our community and on campus. So we do some surveys. We really like surveys up there of our student athletes where they're allowed to kind of voice their opinions anonymously if they may not want to talk about it openly, about both mental health and diversity challenges. We face unique challenges like the darkness, which really takes its toll in the cold. So those are things that play into that as well. But we use that survey to determine some resources that we can bring into the department. And then we also provide resources at the beginning of the year for all sorts of things. We have a lot of rural students that are Alaska Native as well, student athletes. So providing resources to them. And we go as far as diverse identities, but also, because of the weather and the elements, providing resources for that. We rent out happy lights through our department. We purchased a bunch of those for the student athletes to be able to come in and take to their dorm rooms and have with them. But then we provide a list of resources for mental health counseling, whatever that is across the campus, even if it's where you can get your hair done. Because we run into that with a lot of our student athletes not having the resources available to them being in Alaska. So we try to compile all that and then give that to them in their student athlete handbook, and then also in our team binders. So we provide it twice in case they don't necessarily want to look at that. And then also creating like a mental health task force within the department with a combination of student athletes, administrators and coaches to kind of try and provide the best way to help student athletes with a holistic care approach with mental health, obviously, and then physical health, well-being as well. Bring that into our facility to make it more accessible for student athletes. And then we also hold open forums. This year has been on Zoom, but where it just gives space for student athletes to voice their feelings. We, especially when, all the social injustice started really blowing up with the rallies and everything, we held a lot of those open spaces where sometimes it was just pretty quiet, but people showed up, but they just maybe wanted to hold space together. I think that's important. And then also scheduling educational pieces where it's on race, gender, ethnicity, LGBTQ, all those things for our student athletes, but just as importantly for our staff and administrators and coaches to also understand those challenges.
Yeah, you absolutely. Sounds like you all are doing a lot of great work up there to support the well-being of student athletes at University of Alaska Fairbanks. I like what you said about holding space and just providing opportunities for people to come in and just listen or express. That is such a powerful concept. And, in a time when we're always talking about finances and resources, it really doesn't cost anything to hold space, to listen, and to allow people to process and express these I call them big emotions and things that they're experiencing. I also like that you said you do a lot of surveys. I mean, how can we presume to know what? I know at my university, there are 500 student athletes. How can we presume to know what 500 student athletes needs? So why not ask the questions? I think that sometimes we just forget to do that. And we assume, the adults in the room, that we know. So I liked everything you said, but I wanted to highlight those two things. Dr. Henry, any best practices for athletic departments or organizations or even conferences, athletic conferences, to help support student athletes from diverse identities?
I call it taking inventory. And it was kind of what Coach has done with the surveys. But I think a lot of times we just assume that everybody is okay. And we just assume that everybody is strong enough. And it's interesting that I find that we assume that athletes, collegiate athletes, professional athletes, we'll talk about collegiate athletes, but everybody seems to think that they're superhuman in many ways and that they're just able to just deal with everything. And people make it seem as though they are immune to what happens in the real world. And I do think that a lot of times we don't take the time to check on them. And so one thing that I know that I do for myself with all of my athletes is I just try to have a regular conversation with them. Hey, how are you doing? What's going on? How's life? How's your family? I think it's important for us to always remind young athletes that, yes, being a collegiate athlete is very time consuming and physically demanding, but life is still happening and you still have to pick your head up and remember that life is happening and still check in with your family, still check in with your friends. And so for me, best practices says, hey, let's just continue to make sure our athletes are okay. And that means taking 5 to 7 minutes or however long it may be in my visit with my athletes just to see, hey, how are you doing? And what do you need? Is there anything that I can do? And I like to be able to try to relate to my athletes. So I love shoes. It is something that is very important to me. And so, I will have conversations with my athletes just about shoes. And from there, they kind of open up to me a little more and we can have discussions about what's going on. I have tattoos. We know that tons of athletes have tattoos. And so again, it's a way for us to connect with each other and it allows me to be able to be the best team doctor that I can for my athletes.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying and talking about those touch points and also talking about seeing the whole athlete, not just the arms and legs parts of them, seeing them in totality. That's critical for mental health and well-being.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
All right. So, Dr. Henry, since we're on you, and you spoke about attending the illustrious Howard University in Washington, D.C., as an HBCU grad and a leader in diversity in athletics. And I heard you talking about a lot of the training that you are doing with a number of medical fields. What tips can you give our student athletes for navigating racism and other forms of injustice?
Absolutely. I think the first thing we have to do is admit that there's a problem. I think for too many times in this country, we don't want to admit that there is a systemic problem that's actually going on. So I think that we have to kind of take a step back and again, survey the landscape and say, okay, what is really going on? You have to be comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. But again, if we can learn to have uncomfortable conversations, then we can actually begin to heal. We can actually begin to move towards something better. So I think first, and I wrote a couple of things down. So I want to, because this is one of those kind of topics where you want to try to stay on. But I say admit that there's a problem. I think we all have to face our own prejudices. We all have to be able to look into the mirror and say, okay, what are some thoughts that I have? What are some prejudices that I have that I show maybe either verbally, that I show in other kind of ways, or that I just kind of think and it allows me to treat somebody a little bit differently, right? But that's also taking a self-inventory of where you are at. And I think for people who are dealing with certain situations, understand that you are beautiful. You are made beautiful. Every part of each and every single one of us is beautiful. Our skin tone, the color of our hair, the color of our eyes, the language that we may speak, our ethnic backgrounds, our cultural beliefs, all of it is beautiful. And I think that we have to continue to embrace that. And when somebody shows some sort of prejudice towards you or discrimination, do not let that define you. Defeat it. Remember who you are and who you are made to be, and talk to your support network. And we will continue to get through this. But again, I go back to, we've got to face this thing head up, and we've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable about racism in this country.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Henry. You know, we can't change what we don't face. I think that was what I said up front. So admitting that there's a problem,
Right.
Gets us closer. I mean, does it guarantee anything? No. Gets us closer, though. It starts a conversation. It potentially changes hearts and minds, and that's all that's what we're trying to accomplish here. So Mercy, what are some destigmatizing methods or approaches that resonate with you as a student athlete? Like, for example, hearing other stories or languages used or normalized, etc. So,
for me, like I always say, the stories is what really connects people to learn and grow with each other. But also, when we talk about breaking the stigma, one thing that I learned just throughout this whole pandemic, this pandemic like really showed how like many of us we're not taught how to ask for help nor how to receive the help, and like for mental health awareness, like when we talk about providing resources, providing support, it's really important for different campuses, like to make sure that the environment that student athletes are in is invited, is welcoming, and also for student athletes to know that they are part of the team. Like they don't have to act like a certain way to feel included. So like when we talk about different ways to destigmatize mental health, I say it's really important to make sure that we're having the conversations, but we're also having a supportive environment. As someone that came like from like out of state, the one thing that I loved about Trinity Washington, being a minority serving school, the school was very inviting, but also very welcoming. And even though I never played volleyball or tennis a day in my life before I came here, just coming from permanent track and field and cross country to a whole new sport, I liked how the coaches, the teammates, they were able to help me and not like to feel like I was like an outsider, but to welcome me, to teach me different things. But also throughout the year, many student athletes already have such a large bag to hold, like from playing sports, being students, but also going to games. So it's important that like we have these conversations, we have the support, but also we teach each other how to ask for help and how to receive help, because many people don't ask for help until it's too late, unfortunately. And then some people, they're hesitant to ask for help because they're scared of what their coaches, their teammates, and also their fellow peers may think of them. And it's really important to make sure that we see mental health as an everyday thing. And when we are addressing mental health, we should stop seeing it as being weak, as being not productive, but taking care of mental health is healthy. It's productive, but it's important that we have a supportive environment, but also continue to bring awareness, to bring like education, so people can learn how to ask for help and how to receive that help.
All right. Thank you, Mercy. You said changing the narrative. I mean, basically what I heard you say towards the end, there's changing the narrative from taking care of mental health as a healthy practice. And Dr. Henry even mentioned health is wealth. I think a part of what changes the narrative is because we use mental health. If we just went to health and depression is a health condition, just like diabetes is a health condition, we might have some movement. I remember hearing that about 15 years ago, from at another conference I attended. So changing the narrative, asking for help. That's a hard thing. But to your point, you can teach people. That's a skill. To your point, you can teach people how to ask for help. Skill building is a huge part of mental well-being. The more skills you have to manage your mental health and well-being, the more mentally healthy and well you're going to be. So I heard you also say change the narrative and help student athletes build skills that promote health and well-being. But I want to ask all of our panelists this question because we're at the beginning of summer, but as we all know, time flies, and we'll be in August before you know it. So how, and anyone can take this, all of you can take this, how can student athletes prepare for upcoming semesters of returning to campus while we're still in the middle of a pandemic?
For me, I think it's important to really try to connect with each other over the summer break. One thing that often leads to a lot of mental health reasons and different issues is when different students so each year it's like a new team, and some of us are not comfortable with each other. We're not aware of maybe of our different characters. So I think it's important for schools to have either maybe a Zoom call to just learn more about the team. It doesn't matter if you play softball, volleyball, or tennis, but just for each athletic department to have a joint Zoom call to know each other. But also, I would say the stories is what connects us. We all have different backgrounds, but we share one thing, and that's a love for the sports that we play. So it's important that we have these conversations of the resources that are there, the faculty, the coaches, but also what we can do as a team to support each other and listen to each other and be there for each other through the highs and lows.
Thank you, Mercy. I keep hearing connect. I keep hearing connection, which is, it's a resilient skill as well. So thank you for bringing it up. Dr. Henry, you had something?
Yeah, I think for me, the first thing that I would say is, again, coming from a medical background, I would say protect yourself and get vaccinated. Through this whole pandemic, one of the most difficult things that a lot of my athletes, when we were trying to get people from game to game, and that's really what it was the fact of having to test our athletes 3 or 4 times a week. And it becomes taxing. It becomes mentally taxing on the athletes to have to do that. It becomes mentally taxing when you are nervous and scared about if you're going to contract coronavirus and then if it will progress into COVID. So again, I am an advocate of it, and I do say protect yourself and get vaccinated. I think the other part of this is us being honest with ourselves and saying that the pandemic is still alive. This virus is still here. It's mutating. It's still doing, I'll just say, weird things. It's doing what viruses do. But we have to be honest and say the pandemic is still here. So we still have to protect ourselves. We still have to be cautious about how we move. We have to be cautious about being around large groups that we don't necessarily know or may not necessarily feel comfortable with, especially the collegiate athlete, because, it's a team, and athletes love each other. And if you go out and you're at a function that maybe you don't necessarily know or trust, or, and you're not necessarily safe, and then you come back and you're with your teammates, now we run the risk of, getting back to having a large outbreak within the team, possibly the athletics department. So you just have to be safe, protect yourself and protect.
So I heard you advocate for vaccines and taking precautions, even with the vaccine. Coach Kerry, do you have anything you want to weigh in on? How can we help student athletes, their mental health, as they start to think about returning to campuses in the midst of this pandemic that's still doing things?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to echo what Mercy said. I think it was a big shock this past year, just with all the regulations and coming to campus and being in small pods. I think the isolation was really hard for student athletes because they're just not used to that. Like half my team wasn't even able to meet the other half for 6 weeks when we started started school, and they weren't allowed to go in each other's dorm rooms and all these things. So I think trying to do that, not necessarily only within teams, but within a whole department, like Mercy mentioned, I think would really help them feel more connected right off the bat. Because like Dr. Henry said, we don't really know what coming to campus right away is going to be like this year either. And everything is so constantly changing with rules and restrictions on campus. I think doing that work ahead of time to put your student athletes in a position where they do feel connected to each other and the university will help with retention and their mental health getting there if they do have to be isolated for pandemic reasons or whatever else.
Thank you all for that comment, because we're going to go back to campuses and we want to be able for everybody to have good health, physical, mental, emotional health. Because as Mercy said at the top of the session, our mental health, it impacts our productivity. It impacts our performance. And so being mindful and having that top-down approach and having opportunities for people to connect in advance of the semester starting, to start to build and develop relationships and connection with each other could go a long way. So thank you all for those comments. Before we go into some of our questions, I have one more. What is one thing, what advice would you provide on creating awareness and education on mental health when you are at a campus where the value from leadership and coaches is not necessarily evident or promoted? So what I'm asking is, where there doesn't appear to be a large push towards mental health on your campus, if you are at a campus like that, what advice would you give to somebody who is there?
I would recommend to start your own project. The one thing I'm really proud of, Division III National SAC, before the whole pandemic, we actually started every May to have a student-based initiative on Twitter to talk about different perspectives of why mental health is important to us, but also different practices we can incorporate into our day-to-day lives on mental health. Like, I feel like as an athlete, sometimes mental health is like overlooked when we think about like what it means to be an athlete. So it's important to really to spread awareness, like to really have the education for people to know, like, even though you're an athlete, you're not a super being. Like, mental health affects everyone, no matter whether you're an athlete, a coach, or another person, because like sometimes we don't often see how mental health is important to us until it's too late. So just say suggestion, you can create like a mental health awareness project during May, and also July is also mental health awareness, is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, and people don't even know about that. But also, I think also campuses should have like a Zoom call, or if you are on campus, like a town hall meeting on the resources of mental health, because some students like don't even know if they're able to go to the school counselor. And also some students like don't even know if their school has resources. Even if it's there, it's important for the campuses to make sure that you're providing awareness that there is resources, there is support, but also the education for people to learn how to ask for help and receive that help, to incorporate well-being like into their mental health.
Thank you, Mercy. And I want to actually add something onto that question as well. So not just mental health. If you're at a campus where mental health isn't necessarily promoted also diversity and inclusion efforts. So what are some of your thoughts to help somebody who's in that space where there's not a lot of support for either of the very important and vital well-being topics that we're talking about, mental health and diversity and inclusion?
For me, like I always say, in order to envision change for tomorrow, we must create the possibilities today. And many times, because like whether you're at a diverse or less diverse school, there are problems that come up when it like relates to racism and also other social injustice. So it's important to speak up. Some people may not agree with you, may not see where you're coming from, but I always believe that change starts when we start the change. And it's important for student athletes to be that change because there's this quote, the youth of today, the leaders of tomorrow. And like when you look throughout history of the change that happens, it's always the youth starting it, the younger generation, with the help too of the older generation. But it's important to start these conversations, like whether that's going to your dean, to your advisor, to get the students together. You need to find the purpose of that cause, and also the possible solutions for that cause to be changed, to be more inclusive. It's important we continue to be like a unified generation, but also continue to expand inclusion on campus, in our community, in our schools, and also across the nation, because diversity and inclusion matters. Whether or not that has affected you in a big or small way, it's important to have diverse voices, diverse ideas, and also just different activities that align with different interests to make sure that everyone knows that they're part of the team and they do belong on campus and also like every spaces.
Thank you, Marcy. I just love your energy. I can't wait to see what you do in the future. Coach or Dr. Henry, any thoughts on that question for somebody who doesn't have a lot of support at their institution?
Education is really important. I mentioned earlier about our surveys that we take with the data, and we use that to have our executive athletic director take that straight to our chancellor and discuss what kind of needs that the student athletes were having and what kind of challenges they were facing. And then I think sometimes you just have to advocate. You know, we had when the George Floyd incident happened, you know, I had to go to our administration and say, like, I think it's really important that we come out with a statement and we say something as a department for our student athletes of color, because they're definitely the minority. And I think that shows a lot. So I think just advocating for that too within your department and then within your university, I think is big. You know, just me being an Asian female, you know, on our campus with the Asian hate and everything going on, you know, addressing that and bringing that to the administrators that may not even really know that it's going on. We are a little more isolated in Alaska than the rest of the lower 48, but sometimes bringing those things to attention and making people at least listen, you know, and over time, hopefully that they'll kind of open their eyes a little bit more and start to learn and make them aware of that.
Thank you, Coach. So I heard Mercy say take action. And Coach, you said educate and advocate. Dr. Henry, what say you?
So I think one thing that I would leave is for the mental health side of things, recognize that it's okay to not be okay. You know, I think that is something that, you know, there's such a stigma on mental health. And a lot of times, especially as, you know, strong collegiate athletes, we are very prideful and we don't want to look weak. We don't want to look like as though we don't have it together. But again, it's okay to not be okay. And when you recognize that, speak to your athletic trainer, you know, and then, you know, from your athletic trainer, hey, you guys devise a plan as far as what's the best way to attack it, and recognize that it's all confidential. right? No matter whatever it is that you're going through, it's not going to be discussed in front of everybody else. This is just between you and your, in a sense, team that's going to deal with this. So again, it's okay to not be okay. So, and admit that so we can get you okay. Now, when you discuss DEI efforts on campus, I have learned, I've gotten to a point where I am okay with making other people uncomfortable about reality. And sometimes I think you have to do that. You have to push the envelope. You have to push the line just a little bit so that people understand that, again, this is something that needs to be fixed. And I've also learned to come with numbers to people. A lot of times we speak on emotion, and it's perfectly fine to speak on emotion. But when you bring numbers to somebody about the hardcore, about the percentages of African Americans, Latinos, women, when you start speaking on these different LGBTQ plus, right? When you start speaking on these different backgrounds and actual numbers of representation, then people kind of start to understand, oh, okay, well, maybe there is. And you can't deny facts. You can't deny the numbers. So again, be okay with making somebody else uncomfortable, because the reality is that there's the people who do have the prejudices and will discriminate. They're okay with making you uncomfortable. So we have to be okay with making other people uncomfortable and standing up for ourselves and standing up for change and what has to happen. And coming together as a team. Sometimes you can't do it by yourself. And a lot of times we try to do it by ourselves, and it's too much of an effort to do it alone. I guarantee you, if you raise your voice and you speak up, there's somebody else right around you who feels the same exact way, but they might have been a little bit more fearful about actually saying how they feel or saying what's going on. And as soon as you say that, it may take one person to spark that fire and spark the discussion. And then, we can go from there, and we might see some actual real change.
So much good stuff there. Where do I begin? It's okay not to be okay. And then being a disruptor and being okay disrupting the system that's currently in place that needs to be fixed, to use your words.
Fixed.
So it's okay to not be okay. And also, like both you and Coach talked about the data. The numbers don't lie. If you have evidence to support, and then, oftentimes when we can connect those numbers and those percentages to some kind of a bottom line, so with productivity or with performance or with hard dollars, oftentimes we get people's attention. And so being okay with providing evidence and being the one to disrupt the system, because nothing changes unless we do. So we talked a lot about connecting and having conversations and sharing stories, but particularly for underrepresented communities. How do you have these conversations that are impactful but not draining based on all the current events? And I could probably talk about that for another hour, but how do you do it without exhausting an already exhausted community? So regardless of the community, how do you do it?
I believe it's important to just have a supportive space. Like sometimes a lot of us, we do experience a lot of social injustice, and we're often hesitant to talk about it because maybe the group that we're with, they're not open-minded, but it's important for everybody to be open-minded and also to try to understand a struggle that someone is going through. Some of us, we don't really see the problem because maybe we're privileged to not experience that injustice. But it's important, especially right now, as the pandemic has shifted for a day-to-day basis. It's important to have a space. It's important to have a Zoom call. I keep saying Zoom call because some of us are going back on campus, and some of us are still we're still virtual. So Zoom, Microsoft Teams is important to be a way for students, coaches, and faculty to have that space, whether or not do agree, or can understand what's going on, at least you're there to listen to the struggle, and also to be there to support the person that may be going through that problem, and come together as a team to really see what they can do together. Sometimes we're not able to see from the person's perspective what they're experiencing, but when we're able to hear what they experience, that allows us to see, wow, like, I can't believe that's happening. And also, it's really important to be an advocate, to be an ally, whether that's going to marches, to writing to your senators, or just making change on your campus. Like, talk to your dean, talk to your president. Hey, this is not right. We need to do something more. But also, we need to be there to support people. Sometimes, like, when people do bring up change, it's often pushed back because, oh, it's not affecting me, so it's not important. But even though it's not affecting you, you're part of the team. And if one person in the team is not doing okay, the whole team is not doing okay. So support is really important, but just be open-minded to change, to inclusive change.
Thank you, Mercy. So good.
Sorry, I wanted to jump in there because I agree with the idea of the team part. I have a group, and I'll make this real quick because our time is short, but I have a group of probably about 7 brothers that are all other physicians across the country. And during this time they're all physicians as well. So between the pandemic and the racial tensions that had really happened during this time, we would have our Zoom sessions once, like twice a month. And we would meet up on a Sunday and we would all just talk. And it was just a space to where we were able to just completely, as I like to say, veg out about how we were feeling about everything. And when you are feeling exhausted, that's when you need your brothers or your sisters or your teammates around you. Because in sports, we always talk about picking your teammate up, right? And when you're tired, again, we believe that your teammate is going to pick you up. And that's what this is one of those topics. We are all fatigued about having the same conversation, it seems like, every other day. And it seems like nothing changes, but yet we're constantly having the same conversation. Well, in those times, if that's why you have your team, your network to lean on and just say, hey, I'm tired. And something is going to be said from your network that's going to give you that extra energy or that boost to say, we just got to keep pushing.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Henry. I feel you on that. During the pandemic, I had about 3 of those groups of sisters in sports psychology sisters who just, we would gather and I call it express and process and just vent about how we were feeling,
Right.
Particularly as providers, right? And we have to stay up. As we have to provide care. So
right.
I appreciate you saying that. Coach, what do you have for the people before we wrap up?
Yeah, and I'll just echo what they said, and sometimes it's not necessarily a discussion. It might just be space,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, we had some of those within our team, or I've done it with other coaches. And some people want to share, some people don't, and that's okay.
That's okay.
And it's okay that you may just want to be on and with the support, but not have to talk or not forcing people to say things. Just being there to listen and just being there is really important.
I think that
absolutely.
I think that is so powerful because it's always a good feeling to know you're not alone. And being in those spaces, not necessarily saying anything, but also honoring that you're one of a few or one of many that is going through this particular stressor is valuable because you're not alone. And that isolation that we felt in the pandemic was definitely creating a sense of loneliness and, all the things that we talk about that are antithetical to connection and belongingness and inclusion, these topics. So thank you very much for saying that and answering that question, because I think it's a really honest question because people are tired of having the conversations, even about mental health. I like to think about mental health as a social justice issue as well, because people who experience mental health are oppressed and marginalized and ignored and all those things that communities of color and people who are in the LGBTQIA community experience. So last question. And this is just like maybe what's one final nugget? Like what's your gem? It could be a word, a statement, a quote, but what do you want to leave the audience with? Student athletes, coaches, administrators are all on here. What's one thing you want to leave them with? We'll start with Dr. Henry. You're the furthest away. And then we'll go to Coach. And Mercy, we're close by.
All right. One thing I want to leave with. I think I'm gonna go with keep grinding. I think that as an athlete, right, we know that when times get tough, right, we have to go into a place where we can just grind it out, push it out. Not every game is going to be smooth and easy. Not every win is going to be smooth and easy. Shoot, not every loss is going to be, one of those kind of losses. But we have to be able to grind through things, and so keep grinding. Find a song that you love. And again, for me, I'm a big Nipsey Hussle fan, as I am from Los Angeles, and Grinding All My Life is a song that I just absolutely love. And, I wouldn't be in this position if I didn't have my ups and downs and my peaks and my valleys. But even in those valleys, you got to grind through those and just know that you'll get out to the top, but you got to keep.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. Keep grinding. Let's go on to Coach in Alaska. Real quick, what's your one nugget?
I would say, for coaches in particular, with the power paradox being that sometimes when you get more power, you kind of have deficits in empathy. So don't let that be you, and make sure you keep trying to have empathy, be inclusive, and do all those things, regardless of your position.
Thank you, Coach, because I just wrote empathy on my paper. So thank you for saying that. All right, Mercy, let's close it out. What's your one nugget? And we have like 30 seconds.
My one nugget is just for everybody to continue to spread inclusion on your campuses. It's important to make sure that everybody knows that they are part of the team and to belong there, and just have the environment to support to make sure that everyone is welcome, respected, and valued, no matter their background or just who they are. So just support and inclusion for everything.
All right. So the nuggets are, audience, I hope you were taking notes. Keep grinding. Don't forget your humanity and your empathy. And we need support. Everybody matters. So let's continue to be inclusive. All right, so we're going to wrap up now. I just want to thank our panelists. You all were amazing. Thank you so much. I hope everybody in this audience is fired up to take these insights and recommendations from our panel of mental health advocates to your respective institutions, your conferences, and your organizations. We are at a crossroads, but we also have an opportunity for all of us to be a part of the change so that when student athletes tell you they're struggling, they are met with empathy, understanding, support, compassion, and care. Because these invisible injuries or wounds are just like visible ones. Listen, they take and they require time to heal.